Drew, thank you so much for coming on the How I Became podcast today. I'm so excited to hear a little bit more of your story. As know, I saw some really exciting posts on LinkedIn about what you and Oberland is working on, and immediately felt I needed to message you and get you on the podcast. So I know that both of your parents started in agency, media, and advertising world. So I'm kind of curious about how you felt about following in your parents' footsteps and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm excited to be here. My parents did both work in marketing. They were actually both on the client side. When I had graduated college, I had thought I wanted to be in finance, and I was looking for finance jobs, and I was finding it very unfulfilling. And my mother said, you should think about working in an ad agency. You might like it there. And there's this recruiter who called me, and I told him that I wanted him to talk to you. And would you just take 20 minutes? I'm like 6 months out of college. They take 20 minutes and talk to this guy.
Yeah.
And I did. And I got really excited about it. And I had always been into advertising because they were, and I used to pull the Absolute vodka ads out of my subscription to Sports Illustrated and tape them to the walls in my room. I always enjoyed advertising, particularly that campaign. And so I found it an interesting conversation, and then he got me an interview at a place called Eye to Eye Communications, which was the digital direct and CRM arm of Merkley and Partners, and I got a job there, and I liked it. And then through that, I joined a program at the 4As for a little while, and there I met somebody from Draft, and wound up jumping ship and going to Draft, and was there through the Draft FCB merger. And then Verizon left Draft FCB and moved the account to the McCann World Group and to MRM. My clients went to MRM. So I actually moved with the account from Draft FCB to MRM. And as part of that deal, worked out a transfer after 6 months or so. So I got to spend 2008 in China doing work for the Olympics at the MRM office in Shanghai, which was an incredible experience and a real turning point for me. Then came back to the States, landed and got a job in Philly at a small agency called Domus. Worked there for about a week, and then Lehman Brothers crashed, and the stock market crashed, and the world financial system crashed. And in February, I got laid off with a series of other folks. And in March, I wound up getting a job actually at JWT in the middle of the financial crisis, working on HSBC because I had just come back from Shanghai and had some familiarity with the bank, and
right.
had was invited for an exploratory interview, and had 5 interviews in one day. Got the job a couple of weeks later, and spent 5 years at JWT. It was a great experience. And about halfway through that, started feeling a little bit of moral questioning on working on HSBC in the middle of the financial crisis and some of the scandals that kept coming out. And so I asked JWT if I could start creating some nonprofit accounts and bringing some pro bono work into the agency just to kind of balance the karma a little bit. And we had some success with that and won some awards. And eventually one of the nonprofits offered to pay us for a website redesign and a logo redesign. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, there might be a business model here. And I had learned about a practice in Toronto called JWT Ethos, which had been started by a guy named Tony Piggott at the JWT Toronto office. And he became kind of a mentor to me and helped me launch JWT Ethos in New York, which I managed to work on for my last couple of years at JWT. And then coming out of that, one of my clients was the Robin Hood Foundation, which was where Bill Oberlander was working. And so Bill had been a client of mine for about 9 months, and we had lunch at Veselka's in New York City and decided to leave our jobs and open an agency together. And it was a little bit of I don't want to say spontaneous decision, but it was kind of unplanned. He was asking whether JWT Ethos had any projects that were too small to bid on and that we wanted to hand down because he was looking to start a place. And I said, well, no, but I don't think I'm long for the JWT world, and you need an account guy, and we should get together. And we started the agency. It'll be actually 10 years ago in August, at the end of August. It'll be 10 years since we got our first big client, which was the Blue Man Group together.
Great first client. And 10 years, wow, that is incredible. And I'm sure when you look back at where you started on this, you call it spontaneous idea to where you are today, probably a bit of a shocker of what you've built.
Yeah.
How did you?
Yeah, and I had never wanted to be an entrepreneur. It had never crossed my mind to open an agency. I didn't know how to run an agency.
Well, that was going to be my question because you started a purpose. You could have started a purpose driven arm, and I guess you did, but you could have really expanded that arm at another agency, but you decided to go the entrepreneurial route. When you look back, were there other indicators that maybe you had some of that like entrepreneurial spirit in you or that energy? Like what took you to do that versus maybe being the guy that starts the purpose driven arm at all the different agencies? And that could have been your, your career.
I think there are two things. I mean, one, JWT gave me notice. They were like, you've only got 10 weeks to get this up to X million
Right.
dollars, which was 4 times the size of the current business, and way ahead of whatever projections I had made, because they were having trouble in other places, and so that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And so at the time, nobody believed in purpose. This is almost 11 years ago now. Like, purpose, it was an afterthought. It was, or it wasn't a thought.
Right.
We still mostly, the parlance was mostly corporate social responsibility, CSR, or impact. And it was definitely something that was a side project for most brands, and not something that people believed needed to sit at the heart of a brand strategy. So there weren't a lot of opportunities at the time, and we had to kind of over the last 10 years, we've done a lot of convincing people that purpose actually does matter, and a lot of explaining to people what purpose is and where
Mhm.
it sits. And since people didn't really know that at the time, there wasn't a ton of opportunity to like go to another, big name, big letter agency and start a division. Um, Nor did I really think that through, but I knew that, like, nor did I, have the wherewithal to really think about it again, like that 11 years ago. But I did know that I was onto something, and I knew that I liked it a lot better than what I was doing before. And I'm a little stubborn, and I thought I could will it into existence, and Bill did too. And we just kind of, we found the opportunity in each other and took advantage of it.
And what was it like when you went from being part of an agency to building your own? Was there because you were more corporate for most of your career prior to that. So was there huge learnings in your own capabilities or your own strengths and weaknesses in building a company versus being an employee?
Yeah. There were remarkable amounts of learning and surprise. The stuff you take for again, I didn't study entrepreneurship, so you go from being an account person within a structured organization where everything is effectively taken care of for you, to
Right.
I got to be the IT guy, I got to be the lawyer, I got to be the finance guy, I got to be the office manager, I got to learn how a copier machine works and gets reloaded. I got to learn how, we got to learn everything. It's like becoming a homeowner in a lot of ways. Um, and you don't think about, how much time that takes, and how important some of that stuff is. You also don't realize that, when you're in an account at an agency, there's a cycle to it. There's an annual process. When your scope is up, you have to, you have to renew it, you have to negotiate, whatever.
Right.
Like, how that works. The holiday campaign is going to be in the fourth quarter. Like, there's just certain patterns that exist. And when you start your own business, it's just like, what do you do first? What do you do
Right.
next? There's no plan. There's no roadmap. Is the IT more important than the legal stuff? Or do we do the new business thing? Do we get the client? Like, what do you do first? And then how do you split your time between running the business and managing people versus doing the work?
Yeah.
So a lot of that was and still is a juggling act, and you never kind of quite get it right. You just kind of do the best you can with it. But it took a long time to get comfortable with the realization that nobody actually who runs a business knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's funny with a lot of these podcasts, that's the theme of what I'm seeing of like it's a little bit of this like delusion and perseverance to make it happen. And it's I've spoken with founders who are risk averse and risk takers and go getters and a little bit more relaxed. But I think this like you just have to have like blind trust that you will make it happen in yourself. And I hear a little bit of that in your story as well.
Yeah, you do. And, I think there are it's easy um, to look at yourself and be like, I'm not doing this right. I'm not doing this right. I'm not doing this right, especially when you're not like, blowing up with success. And, it's funny. I go to college campuses a lot. I do this little thing when I speak to groups about like everything you need to know to start a business you learned from Disney movies. Um, and one of the pages I use is Kung Fu Panda when he opens the dragon scroll and he realizes that there is no secret ingredient. There is no secret on it, and it's like there's no secret to it. It's chaos, and you just have to try to make the best decisions you can and manage the process one day at a time, and realize that everyone else is doing the same thing, and that it's you try to be nice to other business owners and they try to. It's remarkable how even though you might be competitive, how little actual competitiveness there is.
Right.
Most of it is collaborative, at least when I talk to other agency owners and people around the industry. So it's important to keep that in mind, that when you're kind of running your own thing, that you're not alone in feeling lost and confused. That's pretty much what it means to be an entrepreneur, is to be
That's
lost
a
and confused and
really
hope for the best.
it's like a scary comment, but I think the fact that you're saying that there's a lot of support is really nice because I think sometimes people forget that there's enough pie to go around and we can share it versus always trying to steal from each other. And I'm sure there's overlap in trying to compete or RFP for the same client, but it is it's nice to hear at least from founder point of view and starting the company that there is that support. And you've mentioned kind of this there's ups and downs and things that you'll need to pivot away from or towards. But what do you think, looking back on your story, contributed to your success?
I think one of the things that it created the most opportunity for me was um, doing things that weren't advertising related. When I was part of JWT and building JWT Ethos, I wound up through the nonprofits we were working with, getting to go far beyond just make the website, make the logo, make the campaign. And I got to really learn the issues and got to be part of things like the New York City Veterans Roundtable and the Workplace Mental Health Summit groups, and a few other of these kind of coalitions, which got me outside of my advertising um, day and got me into a much broader general business context. And under being part of those coalitions, which nobody has to be a part of, nobody is paid to be part of, but they all come to it and work on it anyway. You start to learn about the dynamics and the incentives that make people do things beyond money, and an understanding of how to be comfortable doing something for the first time, something that
Yeah.
may never have been done before, and all the risk and uncertainty that comes with that. But being able to embrace that instead of letting it scare you into making bad choices. That experience, those experiences on those coalitions really opened the door for a lot of what's happening at Oberland. That's, I think, separates us from other people, like with the ELF campaign.
Can you share a little bit about that campaign and maybe a bit of the story behind it? Because I know that's where I really connected, and that's why I reached out to you. But for those listening who maybe don't have the background on it, just a quick outline.
Sure. In the not safe for work category of jokes, this is a good one. We were briefed by ELF to create a post for their CMO on LinkedIn about the fact that ELF is one of only 4 publicly traded companies that has 2/3 women on their board and 1/3 people of color. And in doing some research for that, one of our strategists identified a study that Bloomberg and earlier the New York Times had done comparing CEOs in the Fortune 500 named John to the total number of women CEOs in the Fortune 500. And for years, Johns outnumbered women until spring of 2023 when Bloomberg redid the analysis, and women finally outnumbered Johns. But if you know, about 2/3 of the way down the article, the planner noticed there was a chart of other names that outnumbered, that were very popular men's names and that were close to the women's names, and Richard was one of them. And we started thinking, chief creative officer at the agency came up, or Lisa came up with this notion that there were so many Dicks and so few of everyone else, and that there were more men named Richard, or Dick on corporate boards than women or people of color or women of color, or a variety of different breakdowns. And we're like, I bet that's true. But there was no way to prove it or quantify
Right.
it. So we had to do it. So our team led a group of data processors. We got the names of every public board member on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. We did our best to identify them based on race and gender. And then we did the analysis that counted how many Dicks there were and how many Hispanic women or Black women or, Black men and Hispanic men. And we made a really, really funny ad campaign called So Many Dicks, So Few of Everyone Else, and ran it right on Wall Street and on LinkedIn quite extensively. And it took over LinkedIn for like a week in a way that I think jarred people and got their attention on something that doesn't really get discussed very often. And so we're now trying to capitalize on that momentum with our other efforts on the side to actually drive twice as many, to double the rate of hire of women and people of color on corporate public boards.
It's such an impactful campaign and narrative and goal from such a individual insight that the team identified. I think that in itself is so powerful, and it goes back to what you were originally talking about. And what I see a lot of in a lot of Oberland's materials is purpose is the new digital. And this like purpose driven arm, I just think it's so impactful. But I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the purpose driven element of the agency, or maybe what you mean when you say purpose is the new digital.
Purpose, to us, purpose is intent. What is your intent beyond making money? Our intent is to make purpose the new digital. That is the purpose of Oberland. And the reason we chose that is because it gives people a context for the evolution of purpose as a component in the marketing landscape, but also gives context to what we can achieve as an agency. So when we say purpose is the new digital, what does that mean? From an explanatory perspective, it means purpose is following the same growth trajectory in the industry as digital did. It started out as small and tangential and off to the side and very niche focused. And over time, it grew both in consumer expectation, but also in opportunity, and also from an employee perspective. The demand for digital tools grew and grew and grew. Digital marketing landscape grew and grew and grew. There were a bunch of digital agencies that popped up and then got swallowed up. And the big agencies started pretending they could do digital. And Purpose is following that same trajectory. It started out as a niche social responsibility impact. It's becoming more and more essential as an expectation for consumers and for employees. It's starting a bunch of agencies like Oberland and Public and Purpose and Matters, and there's dozens more. Some of them will merge, some of them will get acquired, some of them will get swallowed, some of them will go out of business. You'll see big agencies starting to invest in purpose. McCann's talking about their purpose drivenness. Wyden talks about their purpose drivenness all of a sudden. And it'll keep going that way until purpose becomes I think the center of what a brand stands for. And the reason I think that is because I think when you think about brands, their intent is originally to represent the owner of the company, represent the ownership as a mark of manufacture, right? And in the early days, it was pictures or words or stamps. And then
Right.
Radio gave it a little more humanity. You get a voice, you get sound, you get some emotion. TV, all of a sudden you get much more representation, characters, dialogue, back and forth. You get social and digital media, and all of a sudden you can start to have a conversation. You can respond to things in real time. You start to get also new tools for transparency within companies. And you also have rising social inequality, rising wealth inequality, rising climate disasters. And all of a sudden, everyone's looking around for solutions. And it's forcing brands to take the next step in their evolution to become more human, which is to start to think about things from a moral perspective and to develop a conscience and a purpose for existing in the world beyond just extracting money from people's wallets. And I think that when I don't see major world events turning in such a way that makes the next 50 years blissful for everybody, I think the importance of purpose is only going to increase. And so that when I say purpose is the new digital, I would say make the same argument out. Digital technology isn't going anywhere. It's only getting more pervasive.
Right.
I think that's an analogy that lets people understand the opportunity in the space, the growth trajectory, where we fit into it. And I say our purpose as an agency is to make purpose the new digital. Like, I don't know that it would happen by itself. I don't know that we're obviously not solely responsible for it, but it is our ambition to convince the 100,000 or so people who work on Madison Avenue that purpose is as important to their careers as digital. And that if they want to advance to the next level, just like they have to show that they can master digital and social media, they have to show that they can master purpose. And
Absolutely. And I think with the So Many Dicks campaign, it's just an example of how impactful a campaign like that will be. And you couldn't have done it without, a digital element and a data supported background. But bringing the pieces together, I think, is a very clear differentiator. I'm curious to also understand from your perspective um, if you feel going forward that more and more brands are seeing this purpose driven way of building a campaign is a differentiator for their brands as well, and if it's easier to, because you said you have to convince them, but is that getting easier?
it is getting easier in many contexts to convince brands to put some sort of purpose at the center of their brand.
Hmm.
The areas where it's getting trickier is when you want them to activate on different social issues. And one of the other things, analogies I make with purpose in digital is purpose is a broad name for a category. In the purpose-driven category, you have sponsorships, you have cause marketing, you have social impact and CSR communications, you have issue advocacy as another area, and then you have like just basic product marketing for a purpose-driven product. And I
Right.
think that last bucket is getting easier to convince people is worthwhile. It's that social issues slice of the pie that is becoming more and more hot button, but only on one side of it, right? The social issue advocacy landscape for corporations has I think, two main sides. One is government lobbying, what they do on K Street in the US on K Street, but what they do to influence policy and that sort of thing. No one's slowing that down. Those social issue advocacy efforts, no one has any problem with. When you start to talk about diversity or LGBTQ rights um,
Right.
or racial justice issues, that's when people start to get into conflict with groups in their consumer base. But ultimately, I think the brands that are authentic about it survive and thrive in that space, and the brands that are clearly inauthentic in what they're doing struggle, and then struggle with how to respond to the criticism. And I think that there's in another way that purpose is the new digital. I think that those brands need better advisors. I think those are the brands who are going to like the big agencies in 2007 and asking them to build their websites before those agencies really understood digital. Um, and I think it's the same kind of thing. I think they're getting advice on something that requires a lot of expertise from people who are just putting their toe in the water.
Well, that was going to be my question. If brands, to build a campaign around something that is impactful for them, brands in the first place have to really understand what their purpose is. And I'm curious if that's a mix match right now, if brands truly understand their purpose and can get to that, because you can't defend and you can't be authentic if that's not your starting point. So is that an issue?
Um, I do think it's an issue, particularly for big old brands who are inside holding companies.
Right.
Those things that have become so divorced from their founding, from their ethos, from their origins, struggle. And there's a way for them to build a purpose-driven sense of equity over time, but often they try to jump too far, too fast.
Yeah.
I think for smaller brands and brands that are still controlled by their founders, or brands that are, like Elf, it's easier to understand, have a clear purpose. The trick is understanding when it comes to implementing a purpose or an issue campaign. It's really important to understand the dynamics in your audience. Like Elf is a great example. They know that when they fight for women, they build brand love.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how they're fighting for women, in what context they're fighting for women, women in sports, women in science, whatever it is, abortion right, doesn't matter. Whenever Elf is on the side of women, they're winning. And so it was, it wasn't easy for them to approve the So Many Dicks campaign, but it was very much in line with their understanding of how they build brand love among their customer base, which is fight for women. Even if, your average 16-year-old or 17-year-old girl buying Elf has no idea why it matters who's in a corporate boardroom.
Yeah, it also empowers the young individual to feel like they can perhaps make an impact in the corporate world or make a decision even if they aren't really in that room or there yet. But I guess maybe it also makes them feel part of the conversation and empowers their young audience.
It does. And the campaign, some people were unsure of what it meant at first, but the longer it was out there, the more positivity built around.
Yeah. You've been talking a bit about like the evolution of purpose and brands kind of finding their footing in it, but how has purpose evolved for businesses and entities so far?
to make a metaphor back to digital, or the analogy, um, you're it's easiest to put things into your communications, right? Putting them into practice within your organization is when things get harder. Um,
Hmm.
and anyone who did a digital transformation in a big company will tell you they're hard. um, and I think purpose is starting to make that leap outside from out of the space of marketing and communications and into practice, into better benefits, into better policies on, remote work and understanding the needs of a workforce. I think it is starting to affect how corporations think about their own foundations and their own charitable giving and their own environmental behaviors and actions. And I think you're seeing businesses move in the right direction in general. And so they're going to move slow. They're inherent, a lot, the bigger the company, the more risk averse they are and the less they need to change immediately. And so the more you see those companies start to take these gradual steps, even the ones that may seem artificial at first, the fake it till you make it crowd, um, ultimately I think that's okay in some level. If they're faking it, it means they know they need to be doing it, and either they're ill-equipped to do it right away and they're just trying to get started and they'll get there eventually, or they're blowing hot air. I think more people are in that second bucket where they know they're not where they want to be yet, but they want to get there and they're genuinely trying. And I think that that's okay. And so I want people in the space to be as forgiving as possible and as understanding as possible with brands who fuck up.
Do you think that consumers are forgiving?
Um, it depends. Sometimes they can be very forgiving. Sometimes they can be very unforgiving.
Hmm.
But most of the time, they have very short memories.
Right. Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, it usually blows over. And they even the real, like, I was reading a great article today on Ad Age about uh, LGBTQ creative person who was saying, the haters are loud, but we're loyal. And I think that's a lesson that people need to understand. The the haters are loud, but like they run out of energy for their hate very quickly and they move on to hate something else. And I think with maybe one or two exceptions, generally speaking, the hate noise calms down and brands turn out to be fine. I mean, even if you look at, like, I know the Ashley Madison documentary is popular on Netflix, right? 40
Mhm.
million subscribers. Then they have this hack. Guess how many subscribers they have today? It's like 70 million. They're doing just fine. Um, and I think most of the time, um, unfortunately, consumers have a short memory and they go back to living their lives and
Right.
doing their other things. But the point that author was making in the article was, you know, they saw their first Subaru ad that represented an LGBT person in like the mid '90s, and like them and their wife have bought 6 Subarus, and like it's not just because of an ad. They make good cars, and but it's definitely part of it, and that the
Yeah.
love that brand inspired by consistently and authentically speaking to an audience that doesn't get spoken to often enough, um, it can make a real lasting impact. And I think that if you have a long term view of your brand, purpose has to be in the center of it.
It's so fascinating. And thank you for kind of giving the background of purpose, how it's evolved, and a little bit of where it's going forward. In building the business and building Oberland, I'm sure that there's been a lot of challenges, either challenging conversations with brands who are trying to find that authentic narrative, or just challenges in building a company in general. And I'm curious if you can speak to what are some of the pivots that you've had to make or tweaks to overcome in the last 10 years that you've been building?
Hmm. Um, I think we're a little bit different than most. One, we haven't had to have the really tough conversations with a lot of brands because the way we market ourselves kind of self-selects brands who are already believers or who want to
Hmm.
be believers. Occasionally we'll get a brand who's like, we don't think we're good enough to put purpose at the center, or can you show us how to do it? We had
Huh.
one of those clients and turned out to be a fantastic project, all the way down to like them putting the purpose statement we gave them into employees' performance reviews and using it as a way to benchmark their inventiveness. It was great. And they did it really well and an authentic job, and it made their business grow significantly. So we haven't had to, there are clients we walk away from or pitches we don't take from time to time, but we don't get that many of those, believe it or not. We get mostly believers. And when it comes to our business, I think the strength is that we haven't pivoted. We had the patience to wait out the market and realize that they're going to come here, and that if we keep doing our thing, doing it well and getting better, we'll get there eventually. And, not that we're there. We're, 35 people. We're still struggling like lots of other businesses to grow and
Right.
thrive and all that. But I think if we had not been so committed to purpose, we'd be doing something else. We'd be a content agency or a storytelling agency or a brand narrative agency. And like, I think part of the thing about having a purpose is that it gives you something to stick to. So many brands and so many campaigns are so transient that they don't build up the equity that you over time. You're just kind of throwing money away. The fact that we have been the same thing from when we started till now is really important, not just in terms of like the limited dollars we spend marketing ourselves and how they accrue over time and in our own brand equity, but also in establishing our credibility. When you're a purpose-driven agency and you're going to be guiding clients on controversial issues, it matters to them that you've done it before and that you're not just pivoting and now we're a purpose, like no,
Following the trend.
yeah, we're trying to make the trend, not follow it.
How
And I
did you
think
have that confidence from the beginning that it was worthwhile to wait it out? Or has 10 years just kind of flashed before you and here you are and you're seeing that trend come to life?
No, I just thought I was right. When I was doing it at JWT, I was like, everybody in the agency wanted to work with me on these brands. So I knew
Yeah.
getting employees, getting talent to work on socially responsible brands would be easy. I saw from the beginning that there was money in the space. People think of charities, they don't really realize they're businesses.
Yeah.
They just don't, and like oftentimes they're profitable. They just don't give their profits to shareholders. They reinvest them back in the company, back in the business.
Yeah.
But otherwise, their businesses, some of them have hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. They need marketing services, and the agencies that service them aren't as good as the big agencies on Madison Avenue. And that there's an opportunity there. I've always been very liberal and progressive, and I, saw the social inequality and saw the climate disasters, and like those things aren't going anywhere. The climate's going to be bad, and it's only going to get worse. And so I just saw the trend. It wasn't a trend that was going to fade. It was it was an inevitability in the
Right.
evolution of our society. And like, I just had to have the will to not let all the doubters change my mind.
It's really powerful. I wanna go into my last two questions, and I think a little bit of what you've talked about actually covers the first question, but I'll ask it anyways. What is a myth that you were told when you were starting your company that you want to dispel for future founders?
That all the other founders, no matter what they say on LinkedIn, know what they're doing. That they have this great plan. They don't have a great plan. They don't have this master vision, and like they're the same as you. We're all out here just trying to figure it out, trying to make it work. And some people are succeeding more than others, but that doesn't mean they have a magic answer or that they're in any way smarter or better or whatever. Like maybe they have a better product, maybe they have a better market fit, whatever it is. But don't Don't believe the bullshit. Be the myth.
I mean, that's kind of a human problem in general, I think, as well. But absolutely, it's really tough, and it's nice to hear that perhaps there are communities out there for founders where you can work together and kind of talk the shit together and figure out your pathway. My last question for you, the podcast, as you know, is called How I Became, and we talked about your journey and building Oberland and the changes over that. If you were to name the episode "How Drew Became dot dot dot," how would you name it?
How I became. I'm supposed to end it with a noun. How I became. Um, I'm stumped. How Drew became not like the others.
That's a perfect one. Drew, thank you so much for joining me on the pod and talking all things purpose and sharing how, you're developing this trend that's really meaningful for the future of brands and consumer choice.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been a pleasure to be here, and talk soon.